Ali is going to be talking about water. Our second speaker is Mary Lou Arpaia, and she needs to come over here and sit at the panelist desk. And our third speaker is going to be Peggy Mauk, but she's out on a conference call right now. She'll be in later. Our fourth speaker is Nathan Lurie, the president of the Avocado Society, the California Avocado Society. Our fifth speaker is Consuelo Fernandez. I can't hear her speaking, but you'll have to come sit down at the panelist desk up here. Our sixth speaker is Tom Roberts, a pest control advisor from Ventura County. Our seventh speaker is Derek Knobel, ex-Avocado Society president. And our eighth speaker is Takele. So I'd like to thank our sponsors for today. Nutrien, Del Rey Avocado, Calavo, Index Fresh, AgWest, Westphalia Fruit, Brokaw Nursery, American Ag Credit, McDaniel Fruit, United Water Conservation, Agriservice, Grangettos, Wise Con, Yardney, and Environmental, Root Growers Lab Environmental. So with that, we are being hosted by the United Water Conservation District. So this is really a discussion that is going to surround the World Avocado Congress that was just recently held in Auckland, New Zealand. So we have people in the audience and people on the Zoom who attended, and they're going to share various aspects of what happened during that and what impressed them the most. We're looking at the different topics that came up: disease, new varieties, water management, pest disease management, and so on. The economics and what in the heck is going on with the avocado industry. Who knows where it's going? So our first category of topics is going to be on water. And Ali Montazar, who's an irrigation advisor down in Imperial and is doing some extensive work here in Southern California on the water demand of the water requirements of avocado. He's set up some evapotranspiration stations in Ventura, Orange, San Diego, and Riverside counties. So he's going to cover what he saw as the most exciting part of the water discussions. Now, hopefully, amongst the panelists, there'll be some discussion of what they possibly saw in the water and what they saw in disease and pest management. So with that, Ali, would you like to take control of your presentation?
Sure. Thank you, Ben. And good morning, everyone. My name is Ali Montazar. I am UCC Irrigation and Water Management Advisor in South California. I wish I was there and I was able to present this talk in person, but I have some commitment with another event in Fresno. But my talk is mostly about what I learned from water management updates in these two events. For me, that was a great event. You know, I started a large scale project in avocado and relatively new in the industry and, you know, with avocado. That was a learning curve for me. I learned a lot from different topics and different issues. Here, what I have for you, I was a speaker in both events, Avocado Brainstorming and also Avocado Congress. There were a couple of other speakers also. Their presentation was in Spanish, but I learned some, you know, interpreting what I learned, you know, and I will share with you what I learned from them, mainly their main message. But let me start with my talk first. At least we have this, you know, and I presented in two places. This is a project we initiated last year to understand more about crop water use and effective irrigation management in California avocados. The ultimate goal is to develop tools and information for our growers based on the cropping system and the climate and the issues we have in California. The project funded by CDFA and then California Avocado Commission, helped us win another award to extend this project to Ventura. So currently we have sites all the way from San Diego to Ventura. And Ben Faber and several other UC academics and USDA Salinity Lab are collaborating with this project. We have 12 sites on mature avocados. I mentioned in different climate, different orientation, slopes, different tree spacing from high density to low density, medium density, different soil type, different elevation, and of course, different source of water from Colorado River, wells, and reclaimed water. So we believe, this can represent the cropping system we have in California, and hopefully the results can help our growers. Before go there, you can see in these pictures what we have. We have this tower, a lot of sensors above the canopy, some attached to the tree, and some underground. We do also some drone and salinity survey in these sites as well. We also currently do avocado irrigation management survey in California. Still it's open, but just one thing we learned so far is very interesting, because we want to work on this issue. And it's about what tools or growers in California are using for avocado irrigation management. This is what we learned. 3 specific tools: CIMIS, soil moisture, and irrigation scheduling software. As you can see, about 42% of the responders, use tensiometer and watermarks, and not that much irrigation, software and CIMIS. But also, the majority goes with plant observation, and one of these tools, and about 30%, they just follow the calendar, and also they have a tool for their irrigation management. And also about 44% of growers reported they don't do any measurement on water applications or applied water in their orchard. This is what we have, and we are working, on this to see how what we need to develop and how cost effective these tools should be. So here I would like to jump in another talk in the the Congress. This is one talk from someone from Brazil. He tried to answer this question: is tensiometer the best tool for water management in avocados? And this is his answer. And whatever he showed, he came up with this conclusion: tensiometer is a good tool, but not always accurate data. Specifically in different soil types and conditions, they act differently. And his main conclusion was defining an irrigation schedule based only on soil tension values, which are coming from tensiometer, was not the best strategy for avocado water management. This is and I believe he's right, because we also have data, and finding it shows tensiometer alone perhaps is not, the best tool. So I think at least some of you are familiar with irrigation scheduling calculator for avocados. This is what we have. But one of the problems with this calculator is the crop coefficient. We really never developed, this crop coefficient for the cropping system and all the changes we had in California over time. So we tried to update this crop coefficient, very site specific, and develop one attachment to this website. I think it can help our growers. It means in the future, if we have these tools, growers go to this website and they go with this recommendation and interpretation we have for crop coefficient under different conditions, and they can make a better choice for their irrigation scheduling. This is one of the objectives we have, and we are working on this to make sure we have updated crop coefficient for irrigation management. So, as you can see here, this is the crop coefficient curve we developed for one orchard, for one avocado orchard. It shows how variable our crop coefficient over the season. in early season, spring, we have a higher crop coefficient. Then during summer goes a little bit down and again comes up during winter time. So it's very important for growers know about this. They need to follow. If you want to go with a good irrigation management, they could, do a better management with following this crop coefficient. But it's not only about the season, also about the site. Different avocado sites, they have different crop water needs. So these two, site one is in Temecula, site 4 is in Escondido. So about 20 miles, 25 miles away. But they have 40% different crop water use in these two orchards. So the crop coefficient water needs change over time, over season, and also over space. So we try to, to develop some information to make some clearance on this, about crop water use. So there are several variables, canopy feature. You obviously see the light interception in these 4 sites. They have different, in site 3, high density, 94% canopy coverage. In site 5, low density, 49%. So we need to see how it affects, and we try to answer that question. Salinity, and other issue. We see, salinity. If you look at this, the survey we did in these sites, we found different salt accumulation in different depths in different sites. Depending on the soil, depending on the water source, we should deal differently with the salinity issue, and we try to interpret the impact of salinity in crop water use and irrigation management. So we did some drone activities in this size, and we still continue. This is NDVI map and thermal map. You obviously see the different colors here. Different colors for NDVI means the amount of crop water needs in different parts of the orchard is different. The thermal map, variability shows the stress is different in different parts of the orchard, depending on the slope. On the top, on the top and on the bottom of the orchard, the slope, we have different stress and water availability. So we try to interpret this to see how a slope and orientation may impact a crop water use and irrigation management. One of the other objectives is to use cost-effective tool. SAPflow is a cost-effective. The instrument I showed you in the tower, it's about $15,000 per site. This instrument is just $700. So we try to interpret the data from this, cost-effective tool and the very, very costly data we have, make relationship and recommend growers if you want to use, one of these cost-effective tools. So how the data can help you, and how what is the relationship between the crop water use and these data and numbers. So this is another objective we are working on. But let's go to some other studies from the Congress. There was one study from Brazil. They tried to make some supplementary irrigation water during winter dry season. They found significant increase of yield, sometimes. But also I think the second part is very interesting because it can show something. They found, because, they have rain a lot during winter time, but sometimes, not that much. So they found they should not go with fixed time of irrigation scheduling, because that's rainfall area. And sometimes, rain comes, and if you go with fixed irrigation, even you have some soil water lodging, specifically for clay soil. And they found on that condition, even their yield goes down. So it means, for clay soil, we should be very careful. So water lodging may have some negative impact on yield. There was another good talk to me from Peru. They evaluated Aqua 4D to manage salinity in avocado production. As you might know, Aqua equipment developed several years ago, and several researchers used this equipment for different commodity. Some found significant improvement. They found some improvement, but not significant. But this researcher, they used this for avocado. what this, it showed what it, we have here. So the water goes through this equipment, and then the water comes out of this equipment. We call it electromagnetic water. So the behavior of mineral and organic matter in water change. So they believe it may have impact on reducing the EC of the water and soil. So they compared this equipment with reverse osmosis. We know, how good is reverse osmosis, but the problem with that is very costly. And this research shows, Aqua 4D, this is one result they showed. So the EC reduction was the same of reverse osmosis. This is good. But the game changer is, so the energy consuming with Aqua 4D was 3,000 times less. So very energy, saving here. I think that's a game changer in the future. But they also observed some fruit, fruit yield improvement, about 16%. The weight of the fruit was higher averagely, in this treatment, and also some other, fruit quality improvement for avocados. Another talk was about using Kelpac for avocado. That was, Spanish, but what I learned from this talk, they provided 4-year data. In all 4-year data, they observed some yield increase from this Kelpac, and positive yield, impact from Kelpac, which it seems, a good product for avocados. So that's all I have, Ben.
Okay, thank you, Ali. Are there any questions from the audience, both here and on Zoom? Anything? Jeff? Oh, Consuelo.
Do we know anyone in California using the Aqua 4D for avocados?
I don't think so. For avocado, no. No, I think they are pioneer on this.
Question over here.
But I think it's worth to evaluate it.
Yeah. What is Kelpac? A question from the audience. Yeah, Kelpac, it's a biostimulant. It's a mixture of zinc, iron, manganese, and a bunch of other things.
Yeah.
Seaweed from South Africa from the audience. It's Southern Hemisphere seaweed as opposed to Northern Hemisphere seaweed. Any other comments or questions from the audience?
Oh, that's good point. Ben, he mentioned he's from India and he planted, avocado in clay soil and they have some problem. So it's understandable, I think.
Okay, thank you, Ali. You can go back to work now. Our next speaker is Mary Lou Arpaia, and she'll be covering genomics and new varieties and.
Okay, so I was assigned the topic of genomics and varieties, and I'm also going to give a few slides from avocado brainstorming. And avocado brainstorming was a meeting that was started in 1999 by Ruben Hofschi, and we've held it periodically, mostly in conjunction with avocado congresses. And I'm going to show you some of the discussion points from avocado brainstorming, but I also want to acknowledge the fact that this meeting was partially sponsored by the California Avocado Commission and Index Fresh. So there were only really there was 4 talks that included information on new varieties. The first one that I'm going to cover is by Xander Ernst, Join the Evolution. They're from, Xander is from Asst Nursery based in South Africa. And they are, Asst Nursery is the nursery, that company that is responsible for promoting the Maluma. But he gave a talk because his father, Andre Ernst, had actually an active breeding program for both rootstocks and varieties. And so the question is, why do we breed? And I really like this slide because, you know, because we want different things, like a pug. So this slide to me from his talk was really, really nice, you know, is what are the breeding and selection objectives? And this is really the underpinning of the sign breeding program that we have here in California that's currently funded by USAMIAS. We're looking at tree shape, tree size. I'll show you some data about flower typing, what we've learned about flower typing. In South Africa, Alice Zander is really into, if you heard his talks on trellising and maluma, and we're going to start some work on trellising. I'm going to do that with Ashraf El Kamani up in the San Joaquin Valley, because Ashraf came from the table grape industry and knows a lot about trellising. Of course, we're interested in fruit quality, et cetera, so adaptability to a changing climate. But this slide is really, really nice because it summarizes all the different aspects that you have to think about when you're developing not only a new rootstock, but a new variety. So cultivar benchmarks, this is another slide from his presentation I thought was really nice. And to me, it was interesting that his nice to haves was in there would be productivity. And in my book, productivity needs to be in the must have column. But that was sort of interesting. So everybody who has a breeding program, you know, they vary a little bit about what they think. I also put tree shape and canopy type high on the list in the must have. And I might put coloring and ripening uniformity in the nice to have. So, but this is a really, really nice list, and you can download these presentations now from the web. The Avocado Congress has posted a lot of these presentations. So it's really, really nice. And, you know, the wow factor, pest and disease resistance, that is in a must-have column for me. Anyway, at Alice Best Day, Andre had made 5 selections. These are pictures of those 5 selections. They have different characteristics. Unfortunately, there's no slide that summarizes them in more detail, but there are new varieties over and beyond the maluma that are coming from the Alice Best Day breeding program, and they're in different stages of commercial release. So I think that's pretty exciting that we're going to have some of these ripe in black, some of them ripe in green. So then we go on to the UC breeding program. Eric Folk, who's many of you know Eric. Eric has worked for me for over 20 years. He's in the final throes of his PhD dissertation, and his PhD dissertation is about looking at Flavia and Eugenin, 2 selections from Chile, and that are purportedly earlier than Hass, but they're bud mutations of Hass. So that is very interesting. So he gave a talk about Flavia and Eugenin, and what he has done for his PhD thesis to try to figure out what makes them early. Bottom line, we don't know. Everything that we looked at, dry matter, oil composition, eating quality, there's a hint in eating quality that these 2 are more acceptable than Hass early in the season, but nothing that just whacks you over the head, except for the fact that these 2 varieties have larger fruit size. And so maybe at the beginning of the season, because they have larger fruit size, they may be earlier. But we're in the final throes of doing sequencing these 2 varieties compared to Hass with 2 other varieties, Carmen Hass and another selection. And hopefully those results will elucidate maybe why these things may be earlier. I also gave a talk and a poster on a new selection that's about to be released from the university, UCRV04. Some of you know it as BL516. Some of you may know it as Marvel, and we will have another name. So it'll be very confusing when it's released. But anyway, some of you have seen this tree down at the Irvine South Coast Research and Extension Center. So I gave a talk about this. And the oral talk I gave really looked at the fruit and storage characteristics and the sensory analysis that we have been doing. And I won't belabor that, but we're very excited, and hopefully this thing will eventually see the light of day here in the next couple months. The other talk that was on new varieties that was interesting, we had a poster on some of the other selections in the breeding program. And one in particular is a very large early green fruit that is exceptional eating quality. And we had a poster on that. And then Therese Brewer from Westphalia gave a talk about looking at cold hardiness of different varieties. And so her results were very interesting because in the situation where they did that study, they have the, warm, coolish temperatures and then very cold. Whereas in California, we go warm, cool, cool, cold. And so the trees acclimatize. So some of her conclusions, her presentation is not online, so I couldn't take a slide from it. But it was very interesting because it really shows that we have to pay attention to how the trees, how the climate is before we make conclusions about cold tolerance. Because one of her conclusions was that Hass is not very cold tolerant. Well, in California, it's fairly cold tolerant. So anyway. Now, one of the other presentations was by Gul Ali. Gul is the curator of the avocado collection, the USDA germplasm collection. And he's based in Miami. He gave his presentation by Zoom. And he talked about the tropical crop genetic resources they have at the USDA field station in Miami, in which avocados is one of them. And the objectives of the Tropical Crop Project in Miami is to look at evaluation for the germplasm, evaluate and characterize traits, acquire new material, have coordinated collaborations, update and look at new methods for characterizing germplasm. And then, of course, the keystone is understanding the genetics and germplasm conservation. So he gave a very nice talk about this, and I included it because I want you to be aware that we have this collection in Miami. So what they have in Miami is mainly West Indians. They have 165 accessions, and this sort of gives idea. And he covered also, he's new to USDA. He's been in this position about a year, and he covered a lot of the things that he's planning on doing. Similar, very similar, having a mapping population, looking for genes that control tree architecture, and looking at fruit quality. And so this is just a little bit more about, these are the red dots on that picture is where the avocados are located at the USDA station. So this was a very nice talk, in my opinion, and highlights what your tax dollars, part of your tax dollars is going for, is preserved germplasm for avocados. And then there are also, he's trying to collect more germplasm from around the world to bring into the collection in Miami. And he's also collaborating with the USDA Research Center in Fort Collins. It's looking at cryopreservation and tissue culture. And he's also, they have avocado germplasm also at the repository in Hilo, Hawaii. And so it was very nice. And I included this because you need to be aware of the fact that we have this. And there's a program called Green Global. And he is working on expanding the description of the avocado varieties that are available on Green Global. So it's very nice. So that leads me into a segue into, I think there was a great slide by Nina Mitter from the University of Queensland, Innovating Avocado Genomics. And so she gave a multi-focus talk, and I'm only going to talk about the avocado genomics in the upper left. But the group at the University of Queensland in Brisbane has a very diverse program. It's very dynamic and it's very exciting. So in her group recently, they published a paper on redoing the Hass avocado genome. And one of this slide is really nice because it says, why do we need the genome of the avocado? Well, we need the genome of the avocado so that we can understand the genes involved in all these different attributes: disease, drought tolerance, potential dwarfing rootstocks, dwarfing varieties, clonal propagation, and all that can be used for breeding the tree of the future. because we always have to be thinking about the future. What do we need in a future avocado variety or rootstock? And so Ankal Nath, who was a graduate student in Nina's lab, and Steve Fletcher, who's a fellow researcher at the University of Queensland, they recently published a paper on the genome of the house. And that is a very, very nice paper. And it was, it expanded upon the Haas genome that was published about 5 years ago. And in this paper, they talk about that there's 12 pairs of chromosomes in the avocado. Excuse me. And I won't go into further detail there, but the other thing that Nina's group has done, and we provided DNA from our collection at UC South Coast. They have done a reference genome sequencing more than 45 avocado varieties. And they've come up with markers. And this is similar to work that Inaki Humanza has been doing in Spain, where they're coming up with simple markers so that if we go, what in the world is this variety? We can differentiate varieties. So that this is a really nice tool that we're looking forward to being able to use both internationally and here in California. So now we're going to switch to what I learned at brainstorming, and it feeds into the genomics picture. So one of these is a talk by Edwin Solaris. Edwin finished his PhD at UC Irvine under Brandon Gout. He's currently at UC Davis as a presidential fellow, which was very prestigious in the University of California. And I'm very happy to report that we collaborated with Edwin and Brandon to sequence the genome of Gwen. And we selected Gwen to sequence because Gwen is the mother of most of the advanced selections that have been released from the University of California. Lamb Haas, Gem, and soon BL516. So at brainstorming, Edwin reported on the work that he did that was published at the end of 2022 in a magazine called G3. And if you really want to see that article, I can send it to you. And part of that was he did a principal components analysis of avocados, a bunch of material from our collection. And that was work also that he did in collaboration with Vanessa Ashworth, who you may remember used to work for Mike Clegg. And so one of the interesting things from Edwin's analysis is the placement of Persea sheetiana. So Persea sheetiana, we've always considered to be a different species, but you can see it sort of sits in there with bacon and zutano and a couple other selections. And so we're going to continue looking at sheetiana and really trying to figure out what sheetiana is. The other interesting thing from his work was that over the years, with all the selections that have been done in California since the avocado's introduction and development of a commercial industry dating back 100 years, we have almost a separate race or ecotype of avocados here in California, which I thought was pretty interesting. The other really exciting thing that came out of Edwin's research is the fact that he is very close. I think we're very close to knowing how to differentiate A and B flower types when the trees are small. So this is really important for a breeding program, that if we want to say we really want to focus on getting B flower types or A flower types, he developed this application called Hap Solo because he's a Star Wars fanatic. And but using the Hap Solo, he has been able to sort of clear through the weeds to know what are the differences between A and B flower types in terms of flowering. And the genes he found also relate to the development of the pistils, the petal, the stamen, just the flower, and the flowering timing. So that this is really, really exciting, and we're continuing to work with Edwin on this. And this is just a slide of all the people that, because this kind of work, just like Nina's work, involves lots and lots of people. It's just not one person doing the work. And so this is a huge effort by many, many people. So that leads me to the final thing that was talked about in Avocado Brainstorm that relates back to genomes, rootstocks, varieties. And this is really super exciting. And that is the release of a database called Avabase. And it's really, as Noe, who is from Spain, put in this slide, it's the key to sharing and harnessing all this genomic data for people doing research on avocados for the future. And so this is really, really a major breakthrough. This is a collaborative effort, but really came out of Anaki Germanzo's research group in Spain. But it's been mainly a collaboration between Anaki's group, Nina Minder's group, and my group at UC Riverside. And so we're really excited now that this is actually available. And you can see here, and the idea here behind Avocado Base is that as papers are published on avocado genome or characterizing varieties or understanding what genes are involved, that all that will be publicly available on Avocado Base. And this will drive forward research on avocados in the future. Just think about what Ali talked about, finding avocados that are drought tolerant. If we can identify those genes, these would be on here, and anybody in the world will be able to access that and help improve avocados worldwide. And so to me, that is super exciting. So with that, I'll end. Thank you.
So are there audience questions, in Zoom or in presence? Derek?
Yes, Derek.
Oh, wait for the mic. Mary Lou, I know years ago the Mexican researchers were also looking at the genome and sequencing. Did anything ever come out of that, or did they share it?
They finally published it about 10 years after they actually sequenced it. And by the time they published it, there were the techniques they had used, it's an ever changing thing, just like buying a new computer. You buy a computer 20 years ago, it's a lot different than the computer you buy today. So by the time it was published, it was sort of dated. And that's why Onkar's genome that came out of the University of Queensland is a big upgrade from that the Mexican genome. And Edwin's genome from Gwen, he approached the genome a little bit differently than Onkar, but it gave similar results. So yeah, but something did come out of it, but it took a long time for that paper to be published. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Peggy Mauk. She's a plant pathologist at UC Riverside, a specialist there, and she attended and presented at the World Avocado Congress on diseases of avocado, and she's going to talk about the presentations that she heard and try and consolidate those presentations. So with that, Peggy, can you take over?
So this is a summary of what we have, the different things that I sat in and saw, and it includes a little bit of Australia. And then I do have a slide set if people are interested that I can present the presentation that Patty Manisolva and I had. So I'm going to start with, I'm Peggy Mauk. I'm director of the 2 research stations for UCR, as well as in botany and plant sciences as an extension specialist. We had one day in Brisbane, and so I got to pet kangaroos. So Ita and I spent half a day there. It was really cool. And we stopped at some markets, and I don't know if Ben has presented this or if he's going to, but I just thought this was really cool. Different marketing in Australia. This is Woolworths. Their grocery store is called Woolies, and they market their avocados on eat now, eat later, and eat much later. So this is just I thought this was a great idea. And then they also have the Odd Bunch, and the Odd Bunch is off sizes. You can see there's scabbing on this avocado, and it's called awkward avocados. And the carrots had a different cute name, and the lemons, and they all had cute names, and they were various sizes and distortions of the fruit, but it was 20% less if you bought an Odd Bunch. So in Brisbane, we went to the University of Queensland, And Nina Minner, who's right here, she made a presentation here. She also made it at the Congress. So I just wanted to capture a couple slides. And the main thing is she has developed a way to take RNAi, which interferes with RNA assembly in a pathogen. So she's been able to package this with a bioclay, which makes it last longer on the crop and reverse diseases, fruit rots, viral diseases of leaves. There's a whole spectrum of applications. And so we talked about the possibility of using this or testing this with sun blotch. It hasn't been done, looking into it, but that would be a really cool way to interfere with sun blotch and potentially clean up budwood. They also are doing extensive work with tissue culture for rootstocks. And then we went to New Zealand and went to the field plantings, and it was just like a park going to this grove in north of Auckland. And you can see the rows are probably what 40 feet between rows and 30 feet between trees. And their goal is to keep the trees, I should have put the label here. That lift goes up 8 meters. And so, which is 26 feet. So they want the trees to stay below the reach of that guy. And he was demonstrating pruning. And we're all scratching our head going, really? You want your trees that big? And they still get 22 tons an acre. And this person is very, very proud. This orchard was abandoned, and they've been able to get it back into production. They have root rot, and so they do everything with injections, and they have the little injectors that are on a syringe basis, and they inject around the tree every year. So root rot is a problem there. It's a problem pretty much everywhere. One of the other issues in New Zealand is wind. And this hedgerow on the right side is, I think, around 40 feet tall. Ben might remember. And then there's avocados planted nearby, and they're relatively high density. And then the new plantings, they have windbreaks in between each row. A lot of production costs. Here with kiwi, this was a 1.3 million per hectare startup, and 800,000 of that was a licensing fee. And then the structure there protected from wind and hail, and they still have frost damage, so they installed wind machines, and it was an incredible site. So I took a whole bunch of screenshots of meetings, and so these are going to be less than perfect quality, but you'll get the idea. So there's a lot of work on drones and robotics and determining fruit set, flower load, stressed areas in groves. They're using drones to estimate, they're using robotics on the ground, and they're using drones to apply pesticides, which we do have that potential in the US. It's not an issue in Colombia, where they have it labeled so you can use drones easily and separately from the label that you would have on an aircraft. With root rot, they were mapping out stressed areas and correlating that to root rot. And so this is all, I believe this is all satellite imagery, but you can also do this with drones, where you're doing health ratings and monitoring for where you need to target your pesticide applications or replanting, and using different rootstocks. For drones, and furthermore with drones and satellite imagery, they're trying to correlate what a grower estimate would be with what the predicted yield is based on either the drone or the robotics, and then the actual harvest yield. And he went through several years of data from different growers, and the grower estimate varied. Sometimes it was much lower, sometimes it's much higher. There's nothing like the actual harvest to know what you have. Our predictions are always a little bit off. And the idea of being able to use drones, and we're trying to do this in citrus here as well, would be a time saver and help us to plan ahead. And also, if you look back to here where you have stressed areas, that factors into predicting your yield, and you know where to focus your efforts. You can map out problem areas and then have a strategy to correct those problems to improve yield. Phytophthora root rot, again, they were mapping out canopy stress using different wavelengths of light to estimate what's happening and what the basically just looking at how porous the canopy is. And you know, as Gary Bender and Ben Faber have always said, the best time to estimate if you have a problem with root rot is in the spring when it's flowering and you can see through the canopy to the sky very easily. You have profuse blooming, you have few leaves, and you have a very stressed tree. Well, you can do this with robotics as well, or drones. And then the avocado, the New Zealand, essentially, I think it would be a marketing order to New Zealand Food and Agriculture. They did a survey of all the growers in the different areas of the state, of the country. And he correlated this with yield as to what they do in terms of phytophthora control. And the vast majority that have at least 15 tons per hectare, they all apply phosphonates, inject them. A smaller percentage tests the roots for levels of phosphonate. The best growers are actively managing the mulch, which is critical. The high producers are doing all the things that are in ovals there. The others, different areas, are representative of what other growers are doing. But the zeroing in on all areas and looking at only the producers that are at least 15 tons or more, they're monitoring soil moisture. They're planting cultivars that are going to be resistant to root rot. They're managing their mulch, and they're applying the phosphites. And then the last section that I went to that had to do with disease monitoring was on sun blotch. And this was a novel idea. They're looking at bees and testing the pollen associated with the foraging bees for the viroid. And so they'd go into hives. They would harvest the bees. They'd harvest the pollen. They looked at different types of viruses, but for sun blotch, you could find the foraging bees on infected trees. They had a high level of copies of the viroid. So that is a way. If you're bringing bees in, you could monitor how much of a problem you have in your particular grove. It was interesting. I don't know if Ben is going to talk about the pollination guy. There's some really cool, novel and also ridiculous presentations on pollination. But this only connects to that by looking at how much of the viroid is in the pollen, because sun blotch is transmitted via pollen. They looked at other viruses that were in the hives. And so it was very, I think this is a cool idea, is to get the pulse of what's going on in the area by looking at the pollen. And then the presenter, she didn't look like this at the time of her presentation, but she was wearing a bee hat, but a bee got in and stung her multiple times on her face. So that was her conclusion, was that it's better to have a specialist do this. But they were able to use bee-assisted surveillance as a tool for determining the status of ASBVD in a grove. They stored pollen was the best sample type. They could zero in up to 100 meters from a tree, assuming there were 2 to 3 hives per hectare. It really was a nice idea. I don't know how realistic it is. I've thought about this in terms of UCR. We have hives adjacent to Mary Lou's mapping population. And so if we had someone that wanted to go in and harvest the pollen, I'd be curious to see what happened. I don't know if this is a realistic tool for California, but it's certainly a novel approach for disease monitoring. And then the group of us went to the gala. And so Ali and Ken Weiss, myself, Tabaya, and Ita, we all sat together, and this was a great photo. It was a really great meeting. If you would like me to present the Phytophthora presentation that I made you can let me know, Ben. I can't hear you, Ben.
Yeah. Let's move on, but I've
Okay.
got 2 points to make. What about this bioclay? Could you elaborate more on the double-stranded RNA and implications for not just disease control, but pest control?
Yeah, I can only add my limited knowledge of it. Let me just go back to that first slide. When you take RNA, RNA is used as essentially the template to make new RNA. So if you insert something that disrupts the expression of that virus, or disrupts it, in this case, a virus, but they can do this with root rot, you are applying it to the leaf. It's being incorporated into the plant's DNA, at least in the short term. I think they've gotten maybe 3 months of expression. So the plant expresses that that RNA that interferes with the fungus, bacterium, or virus's ability to reproduce in the plant. So it is a short-term solution, but it has certainly, it depends on the cost. But with using bioclay, it made it so the RNAi was able to be stable for a period of time, and enough time for it to be incorporated in the plant. They've looked at licensing, and the Australia government has no issue with it. They're not considering this GMO. They're not considering it a concern. I don't know what the European Union will say, or the US. European Union, I think preliminary, they didn't think there was a problem. And they're certainly the most strict worldwide on the interpretation of GMO. So it looks positive as far as acceptability on a regulatory basis. And they've shown plant diseases, viruses. I believe they've worked on it with other root rots. I don't know if they've applied it to avocado. I don't know if you remember, Mary Lou or Ben, but it's a novel tool. And entomologists have been working on this for many, many years. The problem with entomology is you don't know the non-target insects coming in contact, where if you have a root rot in a plant, you know you're targeting that root rot. If you have the virus, you know you're targeting the virus. But to apply it broadly and have insects incorporated into their genome, that has been, as far as I know, a deal stopper for use on insects. But for plant diseases, it certainly is a really cool tool.
Also, we're having problems with the chat right now. You said 22,000 kilos per hectare at that.
No, I think it was, well, it's tons. Yeah, it's probably 22 tons per 22 metric tons per hectare, which is equivalent approximately to 22 tons per acre.
Yeah. So another question is Arondis registered in New Zealand and Australia?
I believe it. Well, I'd have to check on the label. I'm not sure.
Not sure. And then this is another question that came up earlier about irrigation. If you've got clay soils and you've got waterlogging problems, you're going to have iron deficiency problems. So you've got to get a handle on your irrigation. Waterlogging is one of the precursors to iron deficiency. So Derek, you got a question?
No, I was looking up one of the Arondis question in Australia. They're heavily on the phosphonate as far as their root rot control. But they put on so much phosphonate, they've got to look for other means to stop the residuals in the soils.
Yeah.
The other thing is, on these country visits, they call the chemicals something different everywhere. And Arondis, I just looked up on the web, is registered, but I don't know if it's on avocados. Same problem we're having here, but they call it something different. That's a guarantee.
And in terms of the US, Jim Atascavage looked at, let me pull up the slide. He did a survey of Phytophthora and its resistance or tolerance to phosphite, and California and Florida has a high level of resistance to potassium phosphite. And I'm sure that's true wherever they're relying mostly on that. Arondis is more expensive. It's certainly an exceptional tool.
We've
That
got a
with
question here on Zoom. Sosin's going to read it.
There's a question. What tree species were they using for windbreaks? Looks like casuarina, tamarack. We need a replacement for eucalyptus.
it wasn't tamarisk. They were pines, and I don't know that we've asked what the species was.
Willows, bamboo, casuarina, Pinus radia, Monterey pine, just about everything they could get their hands on.
The second part of the question is, we need a replacement for eucalyptus, one that is not so tall, ideally 75 feet.
Well, there's 9,000 species of eucalyptus. Just pick one, okay? So
Yeah, eucalyptus though is a big water user. So
water,
and
yeah.
it impacts tree health nearby.
So thank you, Peggy. We've got one more speaker before we take a little break. Nathan Lurie is our Avocado Society president, and he's going to talk about the latest technology from down south. That's not a very good accent, is it?
Well, Peggy kind of hit on some of the drone and robotics technology, but I'm going to give you my take and some general comments and a little bit from the keynote speakers at the event. What about this one? Okay. All right. For me, there was kind of some major themes of the event: sustainability, technology, nutrition, and it was all kind of presented with a subtext of post-pandemic era characterized by climate change and rising global nationalization. So this is from a couple of different keynote speakers, but just some kind of background on the market. In 2020, a $14.2 billion industry, looking to increase to about 20 billion by 2027. Avocados represent 3.6% of the international fruit trade, but by weight, and 8% of the total trade volume by price. So there's a good price dynamic right there. And looking at the general agri-food sector and energy use, it uses a huge amount of energy. 30% of energy consumed in the whole world is agriculture. 70% of the world's total freshwater withdrawals are from agriculture. And there's lots of environmental impacts. The other thing that we heard a lot from different speakers was production costs, shortage of materials and supplies, and the availability of labor. So a lot of the same problems that we're having here in California, same problems are having in Australia, New Zealand. This was just looking at kind of global consumption of proteins. On the top right, you can see, the demand for protein has been steadily increasing over the last 5 decades. And most of that is coming from beef and pork. But it's not very efficient, not a very efficient way to use the land. So on the bottom right, you can see it has a list of all the different minerals that we need for a good diet. And coming from plants and things like avocados, we can really provide most of those vitamins and minerals that we really need, whereas a small amount comes from dairy, meat, fish. My take was that there's a lot of room still for growth in the fresh fruit market and avocado market in general. Bottom left, they were talking about, on the left hand graph there, In developing countries, the undernourishment has kind of plateaued and is starting to increase. In developed countries, you're seeing more obesity-related deaths than undernourishment, and a little bit into agritech. There's massive investment going on, and the trend is increasing. You have huge companies, huge corporations that are really investing heavily in agritech. The bottom left there, they're talking about some of the some articles about drones, and it's a multi-billion-dollar industry that's just growing, but like so many things, it's being consolidated into a few major hands, a few major players, and we'll kind of wait and see where it all falls out. And I thought this was interesting, this quote on the top right. Investors are waking up to the transition to a more sustainable, a need for more sustainability. So this is from Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, one of the largest asset managers globally, one of the most evil corporations there is. We focus on sustainability, not because we're environmentalists, but because we're capitalists. So I thought that was, just funny. These guys don't care about the environment, but they know they want to be successful in the future. They're going to have to make sustainability part of their overarching plan. Like we've heard so much about climate change, more about half of the world's population lives in regions that are highly vulnerable to climate change. And in the last decade, deaths from flood, droughts, storms were 15% higher in those regions. At the same time, consumer spending habits are changing. 66% of consumers rank sustainability as top 5 value driver, and it's just increasing every year. Talking about sustainability initiatives, I thought this was interesting. 75% of millennials and Gen Z saying that the world is at a tipping point. 40% have rejected a job or assignment based upon personal ethics about sustainability, and less than 20% say their employer is doing enough to combat climate change. So attitudes are changing. There's a lot of talk about ESG, environmental, social, and government standards. Throughout the UK and Europe, businesses are kind of stepping up to meet some of those demands from consumers. But there's still a lot happening, and I think we're going to see more and more of that. So back to technology highlights. These are just some slides from some of the presentations that I went to. Excuse the picture quality, but it is what it is. Talking about remote sensing and aerial imagery. We've been playing with drones for quite a few years now, and we know, we can get a better representation of the orchard variability, less labor. We can measure a lot of different factors with drones and robotics. But on the con side, it's expensive. It still requires some in-field calibration. Someone's got to run the actual equipment. And one problem that I'm having with a lot of my remotely sensed stuff is the data management. Someone's got to look at it and interpret it. So it brings in a whole other field into orchard management. This was from a talk they're talking about post-harvest heat mapping. So sometimes where we think the fruit is the most stressed, it may not be. So these guys were using some infrared mapping to kind of pick out fruits that may be damaged or most exposed to the sun. This was a cool little tool, the pick logger. This is, avocado harvesting clippers that track every clip. So as you're clipping, you're getting a count, and I believe it was tied, with GPS to an orchard, so they can track their pickers, how much yield they're getting from an individual tree, and then, of course, relate that back to their remote sensing aerial imagery. A little bit about canopy management and cultural practices. This was a presentation from Therese Brewer from South Africa. This is comparing Carmen Haas, and Gem. Two different spacings. This is a 7x2 meter and a 7x4 meter. So kind of what what we would expect. Carmen Haas with kind of the lower end of productivity, Haas in the middle, and Gem pretty consistent numbers year by year. And they were looking at untreated orchards, those treated with plant growth regulators and girdling or cincturing, and then just cincturing alone. And this is a total summary of what they found over the short time span. So what they found is that plant growth regulators and girdling produces the highest yield. Whereas growth regulators and girdling alone are about the same, and doing nothing at all, the control produces the lowest yield. So unfortunately, we don't really have access to some of those plant growth regulators, but there's a lot of great research being done. A lot of the talks I went to were referencing these plant growth regulators. So hopefully in the future we have access to these. This was also from Xander Ernst, who Mary Lou had referenced earlier. They're doing a lot of work with Maluma and trellising. They believe that the key to higher production is improved pruning practices, and trellising is the first crucial step to making that pruning easier and more uniform. So there's two different styles of trellising that they're employing. Vertical, just straight wire vertical, what they're calling tatura, where it's a trellis, but it's split in kind of a Y shape. So they didn't go too much into the science of that, but it looks like the tatura is, opening up the canopy a little bit more for light interception. And they've shown that that shape of tatura produces the highest yields, quite a bit more productive in that shape than the vertical or the conventional plantings. And a couple of suggestions. Of course, we can't use them in California, but plant growth regulators in vigorous climates. They believe that the tatura system is the way to go. And that in areas with inherent stress like California, where we have salinity and dry, hot weather, this may be the way to properly manage and prune trees. And of course, you have to match the right rootstock, the right scion to your growing area. This was another talk about paclobutrazol plant growth regulators. They're trying to answer the question of which rates will produce the greatest reduction in shoot vigor, what time, and how effective is the plant growth regulator in suppressing vegetative growth in the summer. You can see on the top left, they have the control, concentration 1, concentration 2, and concentration 3 on all those graphs. So concentration 3 being the highest amount of paclobutrazol used, control being none. And what they've shown is that the leaves controls the leaf size and shape, and the internode length, you can kind of see on the top right there. And their overall findings that shoot vigor was reduced when applied in either spring or summer. Higher concentrations equal extra reduction in shoot vigor. Annual increase in tree size was reduced. No difference in the yield. And finally, there was no detectable residues in the fruit at the time of harvest. So that was my general take on the technology. A lot about plant growth regulators. I think the trellising is kind of an exciting new thing that we may get involved with. Sounds like Mary Lou's going to be doing some trials with that. And this is just our event area. Aotea Center and some of the little tours I went on the side.
Any questions from the audience or anyone from the Zoom audience?
A little more on the PBZ, how it affects avocado growth. However you pronounce it.
Paclobutrazol.
There you go.
Yeah, I think the overall takeaway is that it's keeping the trees smaller. It's decreasing some of that summer vegetative flush and keeping the internode length shorter. So in general, you have a smaller, more compact tree with no effect on yield.
Was it a chemical?
Yeah.
It is a chemical.
Unfortunately, it's a chemical that's been attempted to be registered in the United States on avocados and other crops for a long time. It's probably never going to get registration. So this is one of the things that if you're looking at yields and from other countries like Australia and Chile, where PBZ, paclobutrazol, is used, you guys have to take that into consideration. Are they or are they not using it? It's unlikely we'll be able to use it.
That was the next question. Yeah.
Okay, why don't we take a little break? Come back in 10 minutes. Would you do a sign in? And with the return, Consuelo Fernandez from Brokaw Nursery is going to talk about rootstocks. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for sticking around. Consuelo Fernandez from Brokaw Nursery is going to speak to us alone, only those of us in the room and those of us on Zoom, about the rootstock trials that she saw and heard about, what the brave new world is going to be like once all these new rootstocks come out. One of the things, I mean, really, everyone should travel a little bit at least. And one of the things I heard at Fleming Nursery, which is a nursery in New Zealand, or excuse me, Australia, was you tickle the root ball prior to planting. You take that root ball and you squish it around in your fingers and you break it up. You know, when I was growing up in the avocado world, I was told you take that root ball and you drop it into the hole and you slit this liner and you pull it back and you pack it in and you water it right away. And they were saying just the opposite. You want to beat that baby around. You don't want to treat it like a lemon, but you don't need to treat it as gently as I've been taught. And I've learned by killing a lot of trees. And maybe you can start off by commenting about pickling avocado roots. Consuelo Fernandez.
Okay, so hi. The tickling of avocado roots, I haven't done it. I know that in some places it would have like, it would make sense, especially in the nurseries where they send like a pot, because as at Brokaw Nursery, we sell the sleeve, then the root doesn't have like a lot of room to like grow around like a pig's tail. So that's why we haven't done it and we don't see the use of doing it for our trees. But if I've heard in some nurseries when they sell like real trees in pots, they do have to cut the roots because they are all growing like in circles. So I think that's the reason why they are tickling the roots. And then, so I heard that a lot of people using the LE pots, and I've heard advantages and disadvantages. We're also always playing with those. So I did contact these guys and we have some trials. I know that the LE pot would be probably greener because there's not the plastic pot that we're using. But I've also heard comments from some nurseries that are using it that the trees tend to dry faster. So then you would need to apply more water. So we're gonna grow some and test them both here in our nursery here in California and in Spain. And if we see that it actually gives an advantage, we'll consider moving that way. The Congress in New Zealand was my 4th Avocado Congress, and that makes me feel very old. But it was a great experience. I think the Congress was fun. It's always nice to see the other industry players and catch up with what's going on in other countries. The presentations were very, very short. They were 15 minutes and only 12 minutes of talking and supposedly 3 minutes of questions. But of course, a lot of the presentations, there was no room for questions at all. So I've been asked to talk about the rootstock talks. There were 3 rootstock talks in the Congress. The first one given by Peggy Mauk on her work with Patti Manosalva. The second one given by Theo Becker from Westphalia, talking about the launch of their 2 new rootstocks. And the third one was given by Asst on some selections that they have. Then Ben also asked me to briefly touch bases on the tissue culture talks. So there were 2. I only attended the first one, the Let's Toast. So, but the second one, it's mainly the same principle in different countries and different companies. So from the presentation from that was given by Peggy Mauk, they brought up the fact that they are bringing up 3 new selections by the University of California. Those 3 selections are PP40, PP35, and PP45. These selections, of course, were made for having higher yields. They are focused on resistance of Phytophthora to Phytophthora cinnamomii. And these 3 rootstocks are still in an experimental phase, so they are not commercially available right now. They did say that they will be commercially available in California next year, or they think they will be available next year. And those would be managed by the Green Motion Eurosemillas deal that the university has. Then from the 3 rootstocks, I tried to make it as brief and easy and digestible as possible. So that's why I'm making only 1 slide per presentation. So the PP40 and PP35 seem to be very promising under salinity conditions. The PP35 seems to give less vigor to avocado trees. So I think that would be one of the highlights. And then PP45 was mentioned that it's not good for salinity if Phytophthora cinnamomii is present. So if you have high Phytophthora cinnamomii and salinity in your orchard, PP45 might be good for you. Then they also, some studies have shown that PP45 may or seems to slow the progression of laurel wilt in a tree. So that would be another interesting factor. From these 3 rootstocks, the data looks interesting. They might have some potential in California, and we're looking forward to testing them and to plant them as well. So from Westphalia, Theo talked mainly about 2 new rootstocks. Those are Leola and Serrala. We already have them commercially available in California. There are 2 nurseries that have a license to produce these rootstocks. Serrala was selected or released. Both rootstocks were selected for being good under Phytophthora cinnamomii conditions. Serrala was released because it was good under salinity conditions, and Leola seems to be slightly less vigorous than other standard rootstocks, especially Dusa, and it produces very high yields. Leola has also shown to be a good fit for both Hass and Gem. So that's another interesting thing because there's not a lot of trials that use or rootstock trials for Gem. And in the few of them, Leola has been performing quite well. Then going to the 3rd presentation and last about rootstocks, it was Sander Ernst from Asst. He's discussed having 5 new rootstock selections that were selected for or that behave good under high Phytophthora conditions. They have higher yields. They are still in an experimental phase. So the rootstocks were named 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. they have a few trials in South Africa. He also mentioned that they are trying to send them to different countries in the world so they can be tested and commercialized later. So their early trials that they have are on Hass and Maluma rootstocks, scions, sorry. And yeah, they are distributing them internationally. So right now, in California, I think they are introducing it, or they have been introduced, but they might still be in quarantine. So very early stages. Then moving on to the two presentations on tissue culture. I'm not a scientist, but just briefly, tissue culture is where they take like a small piece of a plant, they put it in a lab under a special agar or soup, and they grow them, and they can make a lot of tiny little plants in a lab that later, when they develop the roots, they are taken out of a lab, planted out in a pot, and then grafted and grown out to be delivered to growers. So tissue culture for avocados has been like a lot of research has been done for years. I think it's been about 40 years when the first person started trying to propagate in vitro trees or tissue culture trees of avocados. Like only now in this Congress is the first time we see some real advances in the techniques. There are some promising results in some countries, especially in Australia, where there are two entities that are propagating tissue culture trees. And also in Israel, where there's another one who's also making tissue culture trees. The presentation I attended was one of the Australian ones, where they stated the advantages. Of course, once you start like from a piece of tissue of a plant, they say that, of course, you wouldn't need a nursery. So that would be one of the advantages of this process. Another advantage would be that you could get disease-free rootstocks. And I make the emphasis on rootstocks because the only part right now that's being propagated in the lab, it's the rootstock. Once that tree or that rootstocks goes outside, it's exposed to all the disease and pests that are out in the world. It's a high efficiency process because you can make a lot of trees. One person can make like thousands of trees, and then in a very reduced space. So in a lab, you can have thousands and thousands of trees. And then one of the problems they are struggling with is the protocol, because there is one specific protocol for each different rootstock. So they have studied in Australia, they have worked with Sutana, heat, that's another rootstock that they use. They have reed, Hass, and now they have developed a protocol for DUSA as well, and for Belvic. So and they seem to have commercialized some trees. I didn't go to Australia, so I didn't see the trees myself. They said the trees look good. They have a few trees out in the orchards. So it seems like an interesting technique and something that we are keeping our eyes on. So that's mainly the talks I attended. Very briefly, I tried to summarize it. I don't know if you have any questions about that first part of the presentation of the talks.
We have a question from the Zoom audience. How does Xarala compare to DUSA for salinity tolerance?
It seems to tolerate salinity better, especially my comment is based on some research made by Peggy Mauk at UCR, where Xarala and I believe it was PP40 were the best ones for salinity in that trial. So both of them better than DUSA.
And is there any comment about the yield off of trellises that Alice Best did, is there effect on fruit size as well as yield? Or
The trellising?
Yeah.
I don't know whether there's an effect on fruit size and I have no idea, Marie-Lou, do you?
there, it appears there might be some effect, but it's not clear.
Yeah. And also, yes, so that's what I wanted to make emphasis, the trellising part that Nathan mentioned. The whole presentation showed how good trellising was for Maluma. So it's important for us to keep in mind that they are not, or at least in their presentation, they didn't show results for CAS being trellised. So that's a complete different story. And another thing that we need to keep in mind is the sunburn, because we are exposing branches, we are exposing fruit, and we also need to keep in mind that the labor in South Africa, it's less than $2 compared to our $15 per hour. So that would be another thing to keep in mind, but I'm very happy that Marie-Lou will start doing that trial, because I think it will be interesting to see how or what happens here in California. And some of my industry takeaways are that there's a dynamic industry in the avocado business. I saw lots of new participants, there are new alliances, and people are trying to look for partners in different countries. There's a lot of communication between different countries. Then from a grower's point of view, we all are having some challenging times ahead. There's a high supply of fruit coming in from places in Africa, from Latin America. They have been planting like crazy, so it will be challenging for all of us. And that's why we really need to focus all of our efforts in greater efficiencies. And then from a marketing point of view, high supply of fruit is also expected. And it's important to develop the current markets and to develop new markets. The current markets, I heard from some people in the industry, especially from Chile, that they need to develop a market, especially in the EU. They say in the States, we do have promotion. We do like go out there and say how nice avocados are. We have the CAC and the hub. But in Europe, they are lacking of like a common effort. This is not what I'm saying, because this is not my area of expertise, but these are the complaints that I heard. So that's pretty much it. I don't know if anyone has comments or questions. I just remembered, sorry. There was another interesting talk that it's unrelated to rootstocks that was about pruning, the timing of pruning. And I really took note about this one because we're getting to the time of the year, and they were evaluating the different times of pruning, and they were suggesting never to prune in the middle of summer, because as we know, that when the summer, most of our fruit for the next season will be coming out in the summer flush. So we don't want to prune our trees in the middle of that summer flush, because that's the wood where the most of our fruit will be for next year. So that was the highlight I got from that presentation.
That's it for that talk. Okay, thank you. So we're going to talk about something that's critical to all of us, pests of avocado. And the head pest man is right here to talk to us, Tom Roberts.
Thanks, Ben. When Ben asked me to talk, I said, Ben, I need at least an hour. He said, you got 10 to 15 minutes. I said, how about 30 minutes? He said, you got 10 to 15 minutes. So we negotiated. I said, how about 10 to 15 minutes? He said, you got it. So my focus was, they had two sections, IPM and pests. And at the same time, there were three other talks going on. So I bounced around, but I saw mainly the pests talks. So that my two speeches were about IPM in Australia and the ambrosia beetles in Mexico. And the IPM in Australia is very similar to New Zealand. Their theme was respectful. My general impressions, people were friendly, a wide variety of foods to sample. The weather for the conference was great. Beyond that, it was variable, and the meetings were informative. That shot is Mount Taranaki with viewing from a bridge that had a native name, a Maori name, from New Plymouth on the North Island. So the two talks that I focused on, one was on integrated pest management in Australia by Dr. Ian Newton. And again, I want to state that New Zealand has similar pests. Their most common ones are on this list. Their main concerns are what they call BSB, banana spotting bug, and then the citrus blossom bug, along with several others. Most of the avocados are on the east coast of Australia. The bottom segment there, WA, is West Australia. So it's a completely different environment and small acreage. So here are their most common chemical controls, which I found amazing. If the theme of the conference was sustainable, they're using old line chemistry in Australia. Lanate, superthion, which these are all carbamates and organophosphates mainly. And then at the bottom there in Western Australia, they're using Moorsban. We never even had that registered in California. And Bulldog is a pyrethroid. They use a lot of pyrethroids too. As I mentioned, their main pest is citrus blossom bug and fruit spotting bug, the banana spotting bug. And their emerging pests that they mentioned were, I'm sorry, take a step back. They're getting resistance now. It's shocking. And so to reiterate what we're doing here, we do have a pyrethroid registered in avocados, and we risk that same scenario showing up if we continue to use it. And the advantage to this pyrethroid is it has a short harvest interval. And so we tend to use it when the price is high and we want to pick, and we don't want to wait 14 days for the abamectin products. So that can become problematic over time. So the key that Joe Morris said was to not use the pyrethroids more than once every 3 years or so that you reduce that chance of happening. On top of that, you get resurgence of other pests. I have seen outbreaks of omnivorous looper when we're using pyrethroids. So I try to tie this into California, try to relate it to what we're doing. They do have another, a native, I guess it's a native pest, greenhouse thrips. That's their main thrips problem. So they mentioned banana spotting bug. It's difficult to control. It's a migratory type pest. Moves out of the native brush at some point. They weren't sure of the mechanism, but it's probably when it dries out and they're looking for something green to feed on, and just by chance they poke fruit, and they poke more than one fruit, sort of like a snail. They keep hitting fruit so they can do multiple fruit damage. Limited options to control it. That's why they're heavily chemically based, and it's hard to detect. A lot of scouting. So this shows the avocado growing region and the spread of the three bug species. And so this is just a slide I stuck in here as far as what California does. I think one advantage we have is that we have several classes of chemicals. We can rotate more chemistries compared to Australia and New Zealand. We also have the advantage of high temperature that kills our avocado thrips, our main pest. We don't have good biological control though. Same with Persea mite, lots of chemical classes, even more so than what we have with avocado thrips. If we need to treat it, we can also manipulate our nitrogen amounts to replace lost leaves on young trees. We can reduce tree stress by reducing crop load and managing our root rot. And occasionally we get high temperatures that actually knock Persea mite out. We do have predators that are commercially available, but they're somewhat difficult to manage and questionable economics. So they developed a pheromone trap for their bug, and it's been effective in being able to detect its migration into the avocado growing areas. And they seem to notice that the the damage is more towards the borders or more towards where these traps are placed. And there's less damage away from the pheromone traps, but they haven't developed a trap and kill method yet. And that's where they're working on it. And the sticky traps break down in sunlight, so they're constantly replacing those. They don't have a economic threshold yet. They don't know how many bugs means lots of damage. It's pretty much you can't tolerate anything. This just shows the effect of the outside edge where they put the trap, and less damage further into the orchard. Oh, and they're working on fungal-based biopesticides that attack the bug. This is just in initial stages. They don't have much documentation, but it looks promising. I don't know how they have higher humidities, so it might be easier to manage and manipulate in their environment than it would be in California. Another pest that New Zealand and Australia have is light brown apple moth, and we've had that in the past. It's never been a pest. So I forgot to ask what the problem was. It might be there's with heavy crops, you've got feeding in between the fruit clusters of the larval stage. So the second talk I thought was important was one on pests in Mexico, and specifically the ambrosia beetles on avocados. This just shows where the avocados are grown in Mexico. So there's two species of ambrosia beetles. One are the bark beetles and one are the true ambrosia beetles. And then beyond that, there's two species that are damaging. The one that causes tree death in Florida, spreads laurel wilt disease. That's the Xyloborus species of beetle, which we don't have. We have Xyloborus beetles, but not the one that Florida has. And then Uolaceae, which is the Polyphicus shothole borer, which also has fungal spores that it spreads and can cause tissue death in avocados, but does not seem to be that problematic, at least in California. In Israel, it seems to be more problematic. They've talked about severe branch dieback and having to cut off tree limbs. And yet over a 3-year period, as I remember, they've never had production loss in managing this pest. So I don't know how serious it is in Israel anymore. And the topic of this, the main focus of this talk was they discovered and are monitoring now, there are what they call phoretic mites. And a phoretic mite, a phoretic species, phoracy is insects that hitchhike on other insects. So they found quite a lot of species of mites that are associated with these beetles that bore into the avocado trees. And this just shows one of the species of mites on a Polyphicus shothole borer. That's the life cycle of the mite. It follows the life cycle of the beetle. That's how they survive. They feed on the beetles. They feed on nematodes. They feed on the fungus feeding mites. And so they don't kill their host, but they may be managing it. And this might explain why we don't have, we thought this was going to be devastating when this beetle first came in, and it seems to be regulated somehow. And I think it's because they don't prefer avocado wood, but it could be that these mites are having an effect also. And this just shows the species of the mites and how they broke it out. More pictures of mites. More pictures of mites. And so it's basically a survey of the mites on the beetles. Other things that were talked about at the meetings, which I did take notes on, but some of it is redundant. We've seen, and they were important, but Dr. Mark Hoddle had talked on avocado seed weevil and stenoma stem borer. Christina Hoddle talked along those, had a similar talk on avocado seed weevil. And there was general talks on IPM in the countries that produce avocados, Mexico, New Zealand, Israel, and so they were somewhat general. And I think that's all I've got. That's a sunset in New Plymouth that I happen to be sitting down. So any questions?
So thank you, Tommy.
Thanks.
Wait, wait, don't go away. Tell us more about phoretic mites. Have we looked at those here in the United States, in California and Florida? And could they be used as messengers to deliver a death message to
I don't
a beetle?
I don't think because they don't kill their messenger. They don't. Their goal is to survive, and they survive on these beetles. So there's some mutualism, some symbiosis at work here. They both the mite definitely depends on the beetle to survive. So it's not going to kill its host. Could we use it as a carrier for some fungal organism that would kill the beetle? That's a possibility. Yes. But I think we're talking in the future. That's has something to do with money and funding that particular program. Some researcher that has that idea. So, yeah, there's potential.
Any other questions from the audience or Zoom? With that, Derek Knobel is going to tell us some of his perceptions of the conference and what it inspired him to think about, and what is the future for the next World Avocado Congress. Derek Knobel.
Thanks a lot, Ben, and everybody here. This was my, I think it was my 5th Congress as a grower, probably my 7th International Congress. So I wanted to thank my employers for letting me disappear for a week of vacation and then a week of congressing. I'm going to cover general points that I haven't heard today on the Congress. I'm going to talk a lot about the sustainability and some of the keynote messaging. And then if I have a moment, I'll tell you why you need to go in person if you haven't decided that by now. But in general, Auckland was a large city. I mean, it's 2 million people in the surrounds, and there are no avocados right next to Auckland. So touring was a big part of that. And I know Alan King and Tom Roberts came to their own conclusions on loving New Plymouth, where we saw that big volcano. That was one of their favorites. So when you do these congresses, you got to tour or get on their tour. The Kiwi hosts were organized, as expected, kind, and very thorough. There were about 1,100 attendees. That's somewhat down from the last one in Columbia, which is the one that I missed as I was changing jobs, moving back to Ventura County. So it was somewhat down. It was a well-dispersed crowd. I don't know if it was COVID or just the difficulty of getting out to the island continent a long way from anywhere. What I did notice is that the countries of production were fairly well represented, probably from the top 10 or 12 producers. There were healthy delegations from Mexico. What I usually look for are the prospecting countries, which are the up and comers. Do you see somebody from Vietnam, China, Burma? You know, I really didn't see that. I saw a few Chinese taking a lot of pictures, but Brazil was the country that kind of stood out. We had Brazilian speakers, Brazilian researchers, and I don't recall that from the last go around. So as I said, the tours were must see. They filled up pretty fast. So if you're ever considering one, make sure you get on the tours to get out. The programming was somewhat condensed. It was 3 days of actual presentations. Other congresses have gone on for 4. So it was quite condensed. You couldn't quite get the whole gist of a scientific presentation or ask questions in 15 minutes. They did have an app though, which was fantastic. They had the fastest delivery of post-Congress write-ups that I've ever seen. It used to come in a book that was yay thick, and you know that doesn't happen anymore. It's now right online and available even for us to review. They had a wide variety of vendors situated throughout the Congress, from Mediterranean Shipping Company, where you can learn how trends are in the supply chain. Mission Produce was a sponsor, a title sponsor. the Darling Group, a local avocado producer in New Zealand. Those were title sponsors, and we had ample time to visit. I can tell you in general, the gem was buzzing. The word gem, which was not really talked about in present in past Congresses nearly as much, is now the topic du jour. As I think someone, Tom mentioned earlier, the theme of respect is what drove this Congress. Respect for people, environment, and the future. And that's kind of the lead in for most of the conversations. And if any of you want to see what the outline was, you're welcome to come look at my book, but 3 rooms going at the same time, it's pretty chaotic. But to me, the Kiwi connection to their land and their culture permeated the Congress. It's very clear. Just as maybe 20 years ago, climate change was dominating some of the discussions as we prepared for that. Today, it's sustainability. And as a grower, I can't honestly tell you what the definition is. I can tell you it has to do with resources. And after going to this Congress and probably listening to 5 hours of messaging on sustainability, what I can tell you is that it's unique to each country, very unique. Yeah, there are common themes in social, environmental, and economic implications. These things were talked about in the 80s, and now it's here. It's facing us, and it permeated the Congress. What they are looking, though, as far as resource, and it's being driven by consumer changes, your demographic, investors, supply chain, and guess what? Now governments are hopping on board. What are they looking at? Carbon footprint, number one. Gee, what is that? Got to have carbon to make carbon. You know, where do we find this balance? The resource losses. We saw several people tell us that we're depleting our resources at 1.7 times the rate. I don't know how they measure this, to be quite honest, but it came up twice from independent sources. So, all right. They're also looking to limit water and toxic losses to the environment. 3 countries made presentations on sustainability back to back to back. California, Chile, and New Zealand. They were all different. The US, given by John McGuigan of HAB, was very strategic, focusing on selling the message and collaboration. They did tons of surveys on what's important to people. So very, very US-like, I must say. Chile was very agronomic in their discussion of sustainability. That is, what we're doing is making it better for the planet. There's more animals, there's more carbon going back into the soil than whatever was there before. New Zealand, so advanced, very technical. They're miles ahead. Technical studies are done on their supply chain use of fuel and the replenishment of carbon through their trees, way ahead. Guess what? Their government was helping fund that. HAB's a message, and HAB has a Avocado Sustainability Council. They've been working on it for about 5 years. I guess if I had to do a takeaway after the panel discussion, get on it now, do it together, follow the HAB model. A few countries said before people define your model for you. Kind of switching over to the keynote messaging. We heard from some great speakers, International Fresh Produce Association. I got to find something uplifting because Ada's coming up right now to tell you how many avocados there are in the world. A lot. Country reports will tell you there's more coming. 200,000 metric tons per year, 400 million pounds need to be absorbed for the next 5 years. Not easy, but I'll let Ada drop that. But that permeated the Congress. So what was uplifting about it and being there? You're hearing, and I think Nason addressed, there is so much room for improvement in our diets worldwide. We're not hitting our nutritional guidelines. Obesity is a problem. We heard from Zespri speakers, and they're very highly technical marketing companies and brilliant at what they do. They said avocados are generally well positioned for this fit in the nutritional world. It's just how do you distribute it? How do you build the markets? We heard from almost every speaker saying that it's way better to build the demand than just send the supply, which is what's happening right now. You know, and it's really tough, but you got to go bigger. By 2050, there's not enough protein in the world to meet the world's demands. Avocados are well positioned in the food chain as a high value plant protein and healthy food. There's no way we can grow it. So don't look at plant agriculture or substitutes for meat or fish as being adversarial. This was a kind of a tough message for me who owns cattle. You know, this doesn't fit. But the reality is our fish farming is flat since the 90s. Our beef cattle can only go so far in the sustainable world. And it's the plant substitutes that are coming. Florence Van Dyke, on the other hand, a young entrepreneur and leader of the New Zealand Trade Council, was quite refreshing to hear. You know, she's 20 to 30 something, having a great time doing what she's doing, running her own small company. She says, we need to challenge ourselves to deal with changing consumer demographics. You heard Nathan say the millennials are at a tipping point. They're the biggest purchasing group at the moment, and they buy with purpose. And you know what else? They need data. It's like, oh, cry. More data. Who's going to pay for this? Who's going to do the research? But that's a reality that we need to deal with. You know, and at the same time, John McGuigan's saying, don't ask the farmers to pay more. I mean, we're done. How can we fund this research? We've got to collaborate, but don't all go in a different direction. You know, it's clear that some countries are well focused. They're well ahead of the sustainability research than we are, but we all have a great crop that we're growing. We can tell the story, and it does make a difference in what we're doing. I also want you to know that HAB only has 5 real member importing countries, and there are 33 producing countries in the world today. That's a lot. We are lifting and punching above our weight. I heard that as established countries, we're doing our fair share and more. Research, sustainability, whatever, we're doing it, marketing, but we can't do it alone. We got to watch the efforts to avoid greenwashing. Quite frankly, that's what's been driving a lot of this, or environmental and social governance of, you know, publicly traded companies. But really, the whole idea is to adjust your practices farming in line with what your consumers are demanding. You know, this blew me away. Ms. Van Dyke shared a model of a Maori tribe working on a 500-year plan. What? 500 years? I don't know what I'm doing in 2 days, much less 500 years. How do you define a sustainability plan for 500 years? Any ideas? You know, we're Americans. We don't, no way. We don't think like that. But it's quite simple. They boil it down. Just do something that your ancestors would be proud of and be a good ancestor. And that helps drive what you do. The World Congress is a great, we heard this time and time again, that Congress is unique. It's a small industry. Collaboration, as you heard today, is ongoing as a result of these congresses. You know, basically, don't shy away from the challenges with regards to sustainability. Take control of your messaging. Why would you attend yourself in person? Why take that time? I think you hear fascinating strategists. You can speak directly with them right after the Congress or at the coffee hours. You can keep up with country growth, which we really didn't report on, but everybody knows where the fruit's coming from and what we've got to do. It's coming here to the United States. 50% of avocados sold in the export market come here of Hass. We are a unique small industry. It's pretty special. And you get that at the Congress. You know who the researchers are doing the work. You may not understand all of what they're doing, but at least you put a face with the name. You can track your sessions, validate your thoughts on things that you're doing. I've been playing with Kelpac for a lot of years. After somebody said, yeah, I saw this, why don't you try this? Why don't you, against Acadian, you know, you can look at pruning techniques on things that don't really apply, but might. So you get an advanced look with all these pictures and what everybody's sharing. You know, and it really is, and it goes to growth regulators. We had them, we tried it. We get these ideas from research going around the world and we've given it a try. So it actually makes you a better cooperator when somebody comes to ask for help to do a trial. It's really important for Californians to make a presence at these events. It really is. People love interacting with the California contingent, as they said. It is still relevant. We still are relevant at, you know, 250 million pounds, more or less, of the, I don't even know how many billions of pounds are out there. Ada will talk about that. But we're still relevant. We are the father of the Hass, came from here. We're the father of Gem, which was developed right over the hill over here. And you wonder why it does well? This is our baby. I mean, these two, a newer example of that. Born and bred right here. Good for our climates, researched, everything's here. It's up to the rest of the world to figure out how to make it work on their turf. And they're, believe you me, they're getting busy. Personally, you know, why do you go? Well, these interactions with people at lunch, at the coffee hours and the vendor sheds on the tours, pay back in spades. You meet people, they come to the States. So you continue that interchange as a grower. And it, to me, has been one of the most rewarding parts of these journeys. And I think I met Consuelo in Malaga at my first Congress when she was working out there. But these connections stay with you for a long time. So I recommend going in person. And if you do, plan your sessions ahead of time. Take those tours that are offered. Go to the gala dinner, which we got some pictures of. That's where it happens. You're not going to extract the world in one session, but it'll set your brain a thinking. And enjoy the cultural experience, which we very much did this time around. Cape Town is the next World Congress in 2027. That's a lot farther than New Zealand is for us. But if you go by Rio, not so bad. So if you have any questions, I'm glad to take them. And if you have any desire to host in 2031, you got to start raising your hands. We last tried in 2015 in Peru to get the Congress, and they decided on Colombia. So Santa Barbara, people would really love to come back to see California and its roots. We are still relevant. Thank you.
Thanks, Derek. Any comments? Any questions? Oh, here's, oh, yeah.
Hey, Derek, that was a great presentation, and I would echo your sentiments. There's a tremendous amount of value from participating in WAC, the collaboration. You also brought up the overall sense that people still look to the United States as the leader in development, the father of Hass, now new varieties like Gem. And in the presentations, there was quite a focus on the US market for all the exporters there. What was fascinating to me was when meeting with other delegates, the subcontinent, when we're going to have this next presentation, and I know Ben is going to limit them to 10 minutes, of course, but when you look at the subcontinent, South Africa is there. Australia is looking at that as a potential new market. The subcontinent could be a huge consumption for all of this new fruit. But in the presentations, I was very surprised. There was nothing, no data about this emerging market. Yes, the Chinese delegates that were there, I felt were on production research, but India and the subcontinent, I think, could be tremendous for overall consumption and growth. I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that.
I do. Thanks, Jeff. There are also marketing presentations and country reports. These are huge demographic shifts. So when you look at India, which is now, I heard, the world's most populous country, and with young consumers, not a whole lot of wealth there yet, but growing. I heard two things. One, the US is #1 right now and will continue to be for the next 4 to 5 years. But the demographic is balanced in the United States, believe it or not. We allow immigration. We still have a relatively solid birth rate. But in these other countries, India is huge. China's huge, but they're going to control their whatever they want. I was quite surprised. Australia is looking at India, for export markets. Why, they're a little nervous on China. Maybe the submarine deal changes it, but we're subject to these political winds. The point is, you have to start now. You have to work hard. It doesn't come easy to do what CAC and have later on have to build our markets. But these other guys have to unify, get going, and get busy.
Turn it over to 8A. Okay, our next speaker is Takele, me. She's our regional ag economy advisor, headquartered in San Bernardino and Riverside. But she's been doing a study of avocados and citrus and lettuce and broccoli in this area for a long time. Anyway, she can't be present, so I'm taking her place. And this is basically the lessons that she learned from the meetings. As Derek said, there was so much going on at any one time, you couldn't get it all in. And if you tried to go to a meeting, it might have been full and you couldn't get in. But this is a rundown of Ida's talk there. So this is kind of shocking. In this area right here, Tanzania, Kenya, Ethiopia of all places is now a major producer of avocados. I'd heard of Indonesia. Indonesia is one of the largest producers of avocados. Have you ever had an Indonesian avocado? You have to go to Indonesia. Now China is starting to become a producer of avocados, but it's a net importer of avocados. It doesn't show here that India is a large consumer of avocados, but I just read that Kenya and Tanzania are now exporting to India. So this stuff is moving all around and everyone wants to get in on the action. And as of now, the US is the largest importer of Hass avocados. It's kind of interesting that some of these little places like Dominican Republic are significant producers. And they're shipping a lot of greenskins. They're going to Chicago and New York to populations there that want a greenskin. They don't want a stinking little piece of Hass avocado. So there's consumer preferences that are out there that we haven't really been taking into account. So the producing areas, this shows the Americas as still the lead producer. Americas, i.e., that is Mexico, is the big producer in the world and the big shipper in the world. And the trends of avocado consumption have been increasing with time, and it sort of took off about 2011, and consumption has really jacked up. And this is really affecting all countries everywhere. New Zealand, Australia, per capita consumption has increased. Israel, it's increased. Places like Germany and France, which have always been steady consumers, have steadily increased. The point made earlier by Peggy Mauk, going into the field into some fields, typical yield in California is 6,000 pounds per acre. And that's fairly common around the world. You hear these stories about, oh, we got 43,000 pounds to the acre. Well, that's those 5 trees in that little corner there that did it. On average, we're looking at more like 10 to 12,000 pounds per acre, which is kind of like a biological up and down alternate bearing cycle that avocados follow. Now, that doesn't mean that new varieties coming along and new growing techniques and new pruning techniques and cincturing and a lot of technology can't increase production, and proper irrigation. We still have to get a handle on that here in California. In Israel, they're looking at high density. This is a very common response around the world to increasing yields, is planting higher density. And as long as you've got paclobutrazol or one of the plant growth regulators, this works. Using cincturing or girdling helps, but pruning, you got to get a handle on pruning and when that pruning is done. Israel has kind of a unusual situation. It's a lot of the agriculture now is using recycled RO water that's delivered from the Mediterranean that's gone through recycling, gone through RO into the cities, and then is recycled out into the fields. And a lot of times the water quality is quite good, and it's subsidized. It's inexpensive. So one of the things that's happening is the diversification of avocados and how they're used, avocado products. So it's interesting that I think the Avocado Oil Association is located in Kenya of all places, and that's trying to establish standards. And if you look into the olive oil industry, going back 2,000 years, one of the most common problems has been adulterating the oil in order to get a better price. And so this is a real issue with avocado oil. It's a premium oil. There's consumer demand for it, and wherever there's high demand and high prices, you'll see people trying to take advantage of that. This is a table of the per capita consumption in various countries. In Europe in general, it's about 2 pounds per person. New Zealand, it's pushing something on the order of about 6 pounds per person. Australia, it's more like 10 pounds per person. Israel, they're pushing 10 to 12 pounds per person. I forget what from Mexico, it's something more like 20 pounds per person, 25 pounds. In Chile, they put it on everything, the way you put mayonnaise. Whereas, I mean, this shows consumption in China down here. It's less than a tenth of a pound per person. So thinking of India, I mean, the potential there is huge if everyone starts eating avocados. So this is Ida's summary. There is a lot out there. There's a lot moving around. There's a lot of money. People are talking about sustainability. They're talking about how do you sustain the prices. So it's an exciting time to live in the avocado world. And with that, Ida Takele is finished with her presentation. Any questions? Now you can all go home to work. Any comments about the World Avocado Congress? Mary Lou Arpaia.
So, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned the oil because I was going to bring that up. I went to one of the oil sessions and the adulteration is a big deal. And surprisingly, the world oil industry, even though it's based largely in Kenya, is looking to California due to the work that Selena Wang's done at UC Davis on adulteration and developing codex standards similar to olive oil. So that part was really good. But the other thing that no one mentioned here, and I didn't have time in my talk, is post-harvest. Because we don't think of post-harvest in California because we market our fruit, we try to market our fruit within 2 weeks of harvest. but there were four post-harvest sessions, and it was all about the challenges of exporting fruit. And so I think here in California, we don't realize how lucky we are that we live in our market.
Yeah.
And the post-harvest challenges are significant. And that we're, again, just very, very lucky. But there was some interesting papers reported in the post-harvest realm. One of them dealt with really looking at spatial variability within the tree as to what makes a fruit ripe, but why does one fruit ripen faster than another? And that one was really interesting, and that was buried in one of the breeding sessions.
You know, I'm not sure exactly how many Californians or people from the US went to the World Avocado Congress. I was finding out on the last day that, oh, you were there? Oh, you were there? There may have been 50 people from California. So this is a way to exchange information and learn about the problems in other countries and learn from their adaptations they follow to resolve those problems.
Perfect. I was just going to ask if anybody who attended the Congress would have any additional information or insights on what is being done to develop the international market in general, to try to take the pressure off of all the fruit coming here, and what countries are involved or what sort of coordination is happening with regards to that effort.
You know, that's a good question. Maybe Jeff could answer it, or Mary Lou, or Terry.
I'd like to have Terry take this one, but he is the newer of the two new guys here. A great question, Rachel. And that's why I wanted to bring up the subcontinent, was because there was so much focus on the US market, whereas there was a buzz amongst other delegates about, hey, there's another big emerging market if we hit that. The World Avocado Congress, it does have an organizing committee, and the head of the committee changes by each location. So now it's transitioning from Jen Schooler with New Zealand over to the South Africans. That group has worked, and one of the charges was to look at their own domestic markets. Are they maximizing the consumption from their super users in each market? That's one. And then continuing to look at developing markets and understanding those opportunities. Well, that wasn't the focus of the sessions. As you heard, it was a lot on pre-harvest. I'm glad Mary Lou brought up post-harvest. I do think it is very much pre-harvest. There was also quite a bit presented by HAB on nutrition research. But I feel that it's going to be continuing this effort of collaboration with the different organizations, CAC, HAB here in the United States, and our colleagues around the world, to make sure that they're maximizing their domestic markets. And, you know, towards Rachel's statement, if we can kind of push that, what are we doing to expand other emerging markets, instead of just saying, hey, stop picking on us. I know we're great. We've done our best, but there are other markets out there for your fruit. So that's just going to be my takeaway. Welcome for any others who have thoughts.
Consuelo, what were you saying?
That there is also a World Avocado Organization, and I don't know a lot about it. I know it exists, but I don't know like what's the purpose or anything. So I don't know if anyone here knows about it.
So the Congress is kind of the meeting grounds. These organizations like the World Avocado Organization, I'm not exactly sure what their function is. They're based in Washington, D.C., but I believe it's an offshoot of discussions that have happened at every one of these congresses for the last few years on how to develop the European market, which is number 2, right behind us. We're 50% of the world. They're maybe in the 30-something% of the world's export. It's a much more complicated market. We are fortunate to have HAB, which is a marketing order that forces importers to pay the share and develop the market. Europe doesn't have that model, and every Congress they get together, and I heard they met again this Congress, I think it was the day of the opening ceremony, to try to come up with means to do this. The South Africans are the primary driver because they're 100% export to Europe, and they need some consistency in that market, and they need it to grow, especially to take these malumas and everything else they want to produce. So World Avocado Organization, go ahead and Google them, but those are all offshoots and products of these congresses, but not directly related and voluntarily funded. That's the difference. And I don't see one retailer out there funding anything. And I think there's 6 in Europe, biggies. It'd be fairly easy to help them build it. And those are the things we need to focus on next few years.
Okay, with that, thank you to our sponsors for sponsoring this meeting today. The next meeting will be in June, and it'll be on marketing of avocados, how to do it, who's doing it, why they're doing it, and how much they're making doing it. So tune in next June. And that'll be in Escondido at the Farm Bureau meeting or Farm Bureau office.